So for today's video, and actually our final video of the class, we're gonna basically just do a overall recap of everything that we've learned. Just go over a brief summary of some of the material. We're also gonna talk about how just transformed I was between the vast amount of extraordinary knowledge that we learned, to be frank with you. And I'll just say straight up front that I learned a ton of new information from the start of the class to uh, where I'm sitting right now. You think back to my first video, I was struggling to just identify how large like Mexico City was. I briefly talked about the areas in Latin America that I had visited or had the opportunity of going on vacation there and just seeing some of the geography, as I talked about the rural areas, just how some areas weren't modernized quite yet, or how it was only the tourism areas that were really like modernized and really nice and trying to promote the economic growth in those areas. So just as we're going to just jump by week from week one to where we are now. So week one, we really talked about the old civilizations. You think back to the Olmecs and the Toltecs, and one thing that stood out to me there, I think I did that in the first composition, was talking about how connected, how that connection is extraordinary. You think about the what those two civilizations were famous for, those columns. Um, they're completely different geographically, and they were sort of the same time period, but it's to me it's unique to see how two different civilizations can be connected on the same idea and popularize the same idea. Um, so as I said, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, and then you get the Aztecs, and the Aztecs were famous for the aqueduct system. And how this is connected is the Roman Empire, which made it famous. And I forgot to mention how the Romans also made the columns famous, but you have the Aztecs using these aqueducts, an idea that is transpired over. You see the Aztecs in Latin America, and then you see the Romans across the ocean. It's like I said, it's unique to see just how adequate and how sophisticated a system can be used in two different civilizations to such a high, um, really to such a high technological advantage. And then you think to the Mayan people or the Mayan civilization, as we saw in the movie Apocalyptico, with the beheadings, just how important their religion is between the polytheistic gods, what each god represents. So obviously, you saw that they're beheading, and in the movie, like we said, it was probably more portrayed as like gory and horrific because a lot of the information that we have from the Mayans is actually what we took from the Spanish. So it was maybe the Spanish blowing it out of proportion slightly, but we still saw that in the movie and just how extraordinary that was and how horrific it was to sacrifice so many lives. You think about their calendar, how extraordinary, or for a lack of a better word, how unique it was, how they can predict the calendar so accurately, their astronomy, how in line their records are with what we know for astronomy today. So that's just remarkable right then and there. And then jumping back to Apocalyptico, I thought it was really cool just how it ended with the Spanish ships in the bay, how it kind of portrayed that horror from the Spanish coming to Latin America and what they did, bringing disease, and just the fact of the Spanish killing more people through the disease, such as like the Spanish flu, um, just how deadly those were as opposed to the weapons. And we saw that there were slaves, the forced labor, just how all the bad things came when the Spanish arrived. And then jumping into the next week, which was actually the reading of Chastain's novel, Born in Blood and Fire. We think, oh, before I get into that, I can't forget the Arawak, the Taino, and the Carib. It was really cool learning about each of those civilizations and just how connected they were. So now, as I said, going into Chastain's novel, Born in Blood and Fire, we learned a lot of new information. Um, you think back to the quizzes we took or the writing we did, we talked everything really. And I'm going to forget some detail here, but what stood out to me was the Cuban Missile Crisis between the U-2s getting pictures of the missile silos, and just how that interaction went. Or you get the Panama Canal, just the history behind it between making a canal straight through the country itself just to connect this whole side of the world. And you get that all the international trade through all the importing, the exporting business. Um, what else? We talked about just how the ruling there was. We talked about the dirty wars, how many people died because of those dirty wars. We talked about the Bourbon Empire, or the Bourbon Dynasty, I should say. Just the caudillos. There was a vast amount of knowledge in those 2 weeks of reading that novel, and it's really such a good piece of information. And so that was kind of week 2 and week 3. And then week 4 is we get into the topic of migration or immigration. And we saw specifically in Sin Nombre, um, that whole story between jumping on the bus or jumping on the train, um, the Machiapolis, and I think I said that correctly, where it was those two women that were, well, it was a group of women that were fighting for their rights to, and just promoting everything that was going around them, and to show the companies how they didn't accurately award them for severance. Or you talk about the companies that up and left because of the cheaper labor. And like I pointed out in the previous video, you talk about Adam Smith's philosophy of hands, just workers being able to come in, and you have those workers who aren't accounting for their own health. They're putting their health at risk because the situation is so bad that they are willing to risk their own health just in order to gain a profit so they can potentially help their family and help their children. You saw the sores on their legs, sores on their arms, the smoke from the factories affecting them, their water sources, the main river, just a whole bunch of inadequate guidelines not being, or inadequate rules that weren't being followed. And then you also look at the Honduras fault line video between, you get your environmental activists. You had Berta, the Berta murder case, and just how the whole companies, how powerful the companies are, and how sophisticated a relationship between the company, the government, and even the countries outside that watched these horrific things happen. You think about the novel that we read about Trump and Obama's immigration policies, all the outside sources, the ABC, the American Baptist Church Association, who had to come out and say what we are doing by turning these people down is wrong. You get the children that are left at the border in the detainment facilities. Just a ton of really, really bad immigration policies, and a failure on our part as Americans to recognize the horrors that we did early on and to correct our mistakes. But instead, we are putting these people more at risk, and we are alienating them, and we aren't doing the best we can to open our gates essentially and help as many people as we possibly can. It's the same people that are trying to escape their impoverished lands or their improbable or incapable area of gaining a profit. Because you have the big empires in the United States just outbuying or setting up these smaller companies for failure. So again, it's just a really big failure on our part to help as many people as we possibly can. So you have a ton of people coming to the United States looking for opportunities just to provide for their families, and we aren't doing what we should in the first place. Um, and for this entire last week here, we learned about extractivism, or the extraction of natural resources. To this day, and currently I'm working on my extractivism project. I think it's interesting, just all the extractivism going on, and what I'm going to do is the Panama Canal and talk about the impact there. You could also do the tourism all in Latin America. You think Costa Rica, you think Mexico, you have students who flock to Mexico on their spring break. So tourism is really, really big in Latin America. And then you also get the mining. You can also talk about the hydroelectric dams, just a ton of extractivism that you can talk about. And so, overall, in this class, like I said, I learned a ton of information. I've definitely been transformed. You think back to, like I said, the original video, I was struggling just to name a few minor details. And as we sit here at the 11:17 marker, this what I haven't even described or scratched the surface of all the material that we've learned, but I can tell you I am definitely transformed, and I definitely have consumed a vast amount of knowledge, um, just from the first day to where I am now. So, with that being said, I can't thank you enough for presenting all this material and helping me learn. Um, and I also can't thank you enough. I've taken your Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 courses, and I have learned a ton of information, so I can't thank you enough. And I hope you have a great rest of your summer.